Welcome to another episode of the Gay Barchives Show, where we explore gay history one bar at a time. Our guests today are legendary Mr. Charlie Brown and his husband, Fred Wise. So, welcome to the show, Charlie.
Thank you. I'm excited.
Me too. It's not every day that you get to interview somebody who has been the star of the stage for almost 5 decades. So that's quite an honor. You have quite a number of stories to tell, I'm sure.
I do. That's what I wrote. That's why my name of my book that I'm writing is going to be called Tale of the Bitch. Tales of the Bitch.
Now, I'm sure when you first started, you were not the bitch of the South. In fact, you mentioned to me that the first bar you wanted to talk about was the first bar where you performed in drag, which was in Nashville. The bar was called Watch Your Hat and Coat Saloon.
That's true.
It opened in 1970 on Second Avenue and had a very, very brief exposure as a mainstream tourist bar before they realized that that was not going to work. And one of the owners, Jerry Peak, who is still around and kicking and has great stories to tell, went to Indianapolis, I believe, and saw some drag shows there. And he came back to Nashville and said, that's what we need to do with the Watch Your Hat and Coat Saloon. So by 1971, it had transitioned from a mainstream country western bar into a drag bar.
That's right. And that's right after that period started. I was living in Greensboro, North Carolina, and working at a Hilton Inn. And one of the girls I worked with went to a fortune teller. She said, "You need to go with me." And so I went, and before I said anything to her, she stripped the cards up and looked at me and she said, "You're the third sex." She knew I was gay. And she said, "Your future waits for you in Nashville, Tennessee. You're going to be going home." There was no way she knew that. And in the next couple of weeks, we would talk on the phone and she would tell me about I needed to go back to Nashville. And so the day I pulled into Nashville and was staying with my friends I was going to stay with, they said, "Get dressed. We're going to a drag show." Went that night. They advertised they needed a male lead. I applied for the job and I was the male lead and sound man at the show. And I did male parts in the show and the productions and everything. And then we did a thing called Turnabouts. And I portrayed Roxanne, the Latin lovely Roxanne, and went over fabulous. And so they started letting me do it once a week. And then people started begging for me. And so they let me start doing it 2 nights a week. But I still had to do the male part. So I'd pull my hair off, put on men's clothes, run out and do the male part, come on, put a drag on, put the music on, run up and do the number. And it was just, that was the beginning of Charlie Brown. I was taught the sound part of it, the productions of it. And during that period, Carol Burnett's show was running as Stomach Turns. Do you remember those
I
comedy
do.
Well, we had a gay music man in Atlanta, in Nashville, that had a record shop, and he would tape the shows and get us a tape of it. And we started doing all those funny productions. So in our show, we were groomed to do talent, do comedy. And so that's the reason I wanted to talk about this, is because those days is what groomed me into being the entertainer I think I am. And I still rely on those lessons I learned that I was taught during that period. The day you think you're a star, you'll never be one.
And not only do you think you're a star, but thousands and thousands of people who have seen your shows over the decades just fall at your feet. I mean, I have seen you perform for probably close to 40 years in different venues over different places. And the crowd always goes crazy when Mr. Charlie Brown enters the room. So you have done an exquisite job of that.
Well, the fortune teller told me I had an aura about me that scared her. an aura. She said it was just super bright. And she said, it's a good one. And so my career blossomed. It just seemed like every time something happened in my career, something better opened up, which I had to be better, stronger, learn more, and just face the fact that, okay, I'm moving into a new club. I'm not the top bitch here. I'm at the bottom. I've got to work my way up. And that's the way I've always done my career. Is I've always tried to have the best around me because the best makes me work harder.
So before we get to talking a lot about your experience of actually performing at Wash Your Hat and Coat and what that club was like, let's talk a little bit about the bar itself. Jerry told me yesterday that that bar was 5,000 square feet,
Yeah.
which by today's super bar standards is not monstrous. But putting it in perspective of 1971 in a very Christian-oriented, family-oriented city like Nashville, Tennessee, 5,000 square feet for a gay bar was unheard of.
Yeah, it really was. And during that period, we was getting discovered by the production of Hee Haw was going on. And so junior samples and all of them started coming down at catching our show. And so word got out. And so the city come in and said, if we're going to do drag, we had to have male names. So my original name was Renee Walker and my nickname was Charlie Brown. So when they said we had to have male names and we had to have Mr. in front of it, I went back to Mr. Charlie Brown. Everybody knew me as Charlie Brown anyway. And so everybody else had to change their names to Mr. And when you walked in the door, the doorman had to tell each and individual, every person, that the people on stage are men. And that was the city ordinance they put down on us.
Yeah, that was common in a lot of cities around the country. It was, some cities were a little more strict than others, but even I think by the time you got to Atlanta, that was still, there was still some restriction on what drag queens and female impersonators could do in public or on the streets. A lot of bars that I've heard of, the performers had to switch back into male street clothes before they could leave the building and be seen walking down the street or driving home.
Well, that was very wise in Nashville too, because the rednecks. And so we would hide our drag going in and hide it coming out.
So when you first walked into Wash Your Hat and Coat, what was your impression? What did you think of the bar?
Well, it's like one of the first big bars I've ever been in. I mean, that was the largest bar I've been in. The other bars I was in Greensboro and then were real tiny basement bars, And when I was in Myrtle Beach, it was tiny beach bars. And that was the largest bar I ever seen. And it was just packed. And then when the overture went on and the show started, it was just, oh my God. Because I'd seen a couple of drag queens in North Carolina and at the beach. But I'd never seen one perform other than in a living room. And to see these professionals walk out there and just blow you away. And then they announced that they needed a sound man and a male lead. And so I was cute.
And we have pictures to prove it.
Yes. So, and I had hair too at that time.
And now the world will know that. So when you walked in there, the bar, like I said, in 1970 opened as a country western bar for the mainstream public. But by the time you got there, it was a show bar. And it was not just a show bar, but it was the show bar for the area. I've seen in some of their ads, they even compared themselves to Finocchio's in San Francisco, which was a famous female impersonator bar in California. But they maintained the Western vibe, right? It still looked like a Western bar when you went inside.
Well, yeah, it wasn't just Western. It was just like a dirty bar. It didn't have all the Western stuff on the walls, It was just, it had the long bar and it had your kitchen tables and long tables and odd and end chairs, and oil-based floor. And it was just, it had the atmosphere. When that show started, all the atmosphere just raised from it, and the people just went crazy. They loved it.
Now, Jerry told me that when he had that bar, that the entertainers, a lot of people talk today about how much entertainers are paid. And of course, with the advent of RuPaul and all this, everybody thinks these drag queens get paid like $1 million a year. But Jerry told me that when he opened that bar, his performers were paid anywhere from $0 a night to $25 a night. $25 was the creme de la creme for the all-star performers in 1971. Was that your experience there? Is that how you remember?
I started out at $5 a night. And I had to do male lead and the sound.
Wow.
And if I didn't do the male lead, I got cut. So we always had a male lead, And then when I started doing the drag, I didn't get no raise. But you made great tips back then.
Right.
And so that's what you mainly lived on. And wardrobes were stuff you bought just out of goodwill, or someone to make a dress. If you learned how to make a dress, you had it in every color. The same dress, and that's how you started.
Yeah, it's come a long way since then. Now, when you first started working there and you were doing male lead and doing sound, did you know at that point that this was going to be your future? Once you got up on that stage at Watch Your Hat and Coat,
I wanted it to be, but I had no rhythm, and I had problems doing the productions, and they kept saying, "She'll never make it. You'll never make it in drag. You'll never make it in drag." And I'm the one that made it out of all of them.
You are.
And it's because the want was there. And it just seemed like when that fortune teller told me to go home, my future was there. It seemed like my whole world opened up at that point. And if I left, like I told you, if I left this place, something better come along. And it seems like that's been my whole career.
Now, as long as I've known you, I have never considered you to be a pageant queen. I've never considered you to be one like so many of the people that have come under your wings over the years. The Amber Richards, the Sable Chanels, the Ravens, all these people who entered contests and pageants and won and got titles and crowns. But I learned yesterday that in 1972, the owner of Watch Your Hat and Coat decided that it was time for a national gay drag pageant. And he created the Miss Gay America pageant in 1972 and hosted the very first Miss Gay America pageant at that very bar in Nashville, Tennessee. And according to my sources, there was a new drag entertainer whose name was Mr. Charlie Brown, who was the first runner-up in the very first national pageant that he ever entered. Is that correct?
Yes.
Were you surprised?
Blown away. I had the support of all the other queens with their clothes, their makeup, and they helped me with my hair. I mean, they perfected me like I'd never been perfected before, and they taught me how to walk. And when it cut down to the question and answer, they asked each one of us the same question. If you were stranded on an island, who would you want with you? And they asked me first, and I just grinned and made that look, and I said, my mother, she can cook anything. Well, honey, the house just went crazy over me. And that's when I learned comedy on the mic, not on the mic. You adjust that, and so
Well,
it was a thrilling night. Then I went on to the Miss Universe pageant in Pensacola, Florida, and I placed first runner up there too.
wow, that's pretty impressive for somebody who never made a career of being a pageant girl.
Well, I had top professionals behind me, where these other queens were hometown top queens. But that's where I had the advantages. I had top professionals behind me.
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but Jerry Peak told me yesterday that because I asked him if he was surprised that you won, being such a new performer in the industry, that you won first runner up. And he said, I was a little surprised, but he definitely deserved it. He said, unfortunately, he did not win the pageant because if he had, there might not be a Miss Gay America pageant today because everybody would have assumed that it was fixed because a brand new performer from that very bar won the pageant. And he said, so he deserved to be first runner up, but if he had won, I don't know if the pageant would be here today.
And that leads us to Charlie's side of the story.
Everybody said I won it.
In fact,
I heard that everybody said I won the pageant. And that's the reason they didn't give it to me. But, I didn't know that for years and years and years later. I was happy first runner up to Miss Gay America, first runner up to Miss Gay Universe. And it was a scandal in the Universe pageant, too.
Yeah, that was amazing.
The first time I ever met Jerry, Charlie introduced me to him, and Charlie told him, yeah, you can find me the real score sheets to Miss Gay America. And he was sitting there staring at his drink. And he started staring so fast it started sloshing all over the fucking tank. He freaked out.
But, it don't matter. It didn't stop me.
Yeah,
it sure didn't.
Yeah, anyway.
So after these couple of pageants, you're still working at Watch Your Hat and Coat?
Yeah.
In 1973, I believe it was, the end of 73, there was a suspicious fire in the building and the bar burned.
Yep.
Were you working there at that time?
Yes, I was on stage.
Wow.
It was in the second floor and the smoke boiled through the ceiling. That's the first time anybody knew about it. And I was blinded and I could feel my way off the side of the stage to the dressing room, and everybody was grabbing their clothes and running. And I grabbed my clothes and I opened the door and smoke blew up in my face. And I screamed, I can't see, I can't see. And this guy I'd met that night grabbed me by the hand and led me out. And he basically saved me because I was one of the last ones out of the building. And but everybody got out. We lost a lot of our clothes and everything. A club in Memphis called George's Truck Stop and Drag Bar. They invited every one of us to Memphis, Tennessee. And they found sponsors that put us up in their houses. They brought us fabric. They brought us wigs. They helped us, and we worked there for a month, and till we got reestablished on our feet. And they had the Delta Queen, I think it was. Was it the Delta Queen? I can't remember the name of the. It may have still been the Cabaret, but
no,
we
I
moved
think
back.
You're right. I think it was the Delta Queen.
We moved back to the Delta Queen, and I was there for a while. And then I moved on to Atlanta.
Yeah, and Jerry stuck around. Obviously, he's still living in Nashville, Tennessee, and for many years after that, after Delta Queen, he opened up the Cabaret down there in Printer's Alley, I think it was, and then moved it to Hayes Street. And it was a very long-running, successful show bar in Nashville for decades. But you moved on. You decided at that point you had done Nashville. You had become the queen of Nashville. Everybody knew who you were, and you were drawing your crowds. And you decided to venture a little bit south and stumbled across the tiny little southern town of Atlanta. What was that like?
Well, I was invited down, and me and Kerry Dennis, one of the entertainers I was working with in Nashville, and this was during the saloon before I'd come back to Nashville to the club. My first trip was during the saloon days. She got me and her a booking at the Sweet Gum Head, and I told you I was making $5 a night. Well, I went to Atlanta, and I was doing. You came a long way from St. Louis, and the Sweet Gum had a big circular bar right off from the stage. And I got on that bar and started walking that bar and kicking drinks off the and picking money up off the bar and everything. Well, I got off the stage that night. They offered me a job at $20 a night. Guess what? I went back to Nashville and gave them my notice. And another queen was moving to Atlanta at the same time, and we moved in together, and it was fabulous. That was the Sweet Gum Head, and there I was introduced to a whole different world drag, different productions. And I mean productions, you had to dance, but I wasn't in the male lead portion of it. Bam.
Well, you had kind of learned that concept, I think, at Watch Your Hat as well, because from what I've read about the performances there, I was not in Nashville at the time that bar was open, but I did see what Cabaret was like afterwards. And from what I understand, the shows at Watch Your Hat were you were required to do different numbers at different times during the night. So you couldn't be a one-hit wonder and do the same song at 10, 11:30, and 1. You had to, if a customer were going to stay there for the whole 3 hours or whatever, they would see you perform multiple numbers. It would be fresh every show. Yeah. And there was choreography involved, and we
did an opening production, a middle comedy, and a closing production.
So it was truly entertainment on a grand scale. It was not just this one person comes out in a wig and a dress and lip syncs to a song. It was arranged and choreographed and set up like a proper show you would see on Broadway or in Vegas.
Yeah, we had production costumes and stuff we had to wear, and that's, like I said, that's why I wanted to talk about Watch Hat and Coach Saloon, because that was the base of my career. I was taught comedy, I was taught productions, I was taught hair, I was taught costuming and personality. I was taught smile. And my daddy told me, smile. You keep a smile on your face, you can go around the world. But if you don't, you'll go to the pier and wave goodbye to your friends that are smiling.
And so then you moved to Atlanta, and at the time, Sweet Gum Head was billed as the showplace of the South. It was the ultimate drag bar in the entire Southeast. It was a relatively large bar. It had what people who have now become legends in the world of drag that performed there over the years. Martin Paget wrote a brilliant book talking about a lot of what went on stage and behind the scenes at the Sweet Gum Head. It's not just another hole in the wall. This is another legendary bar. And here's Charlie Brown, hillbilly from Tennessee, not a whole lot of drag experience, been on the stage for a year or two, and pops into the big city and ends up on the biggest stage in town. How did that feel?
Unbelievable. And see my picture in the magazines and stuff, not just in the ad, but a picture, a caption writing about you or something. Going into a restaurant, they go, Charlie Brown, it was, the gay life was more open here than it was in Tennessee. And I felt like I'd found freedom. And like I told you, I was exposed to a whole new world of drag. I sit back and watch pageants before I ever entered Miss Georgia. I entered Miss Atlanta first, wasn't it? I won Miss Bayou Landing, the bar in Texas. And I went out there and the night I entered the bar, I had a gigantic headdress on and pasties and a bra and a G-string. And that night, Cleopatra, it premiered on TV. And they held a show for the owner to watch Cleopatra. And when I went in, and that crowd parted when I come through that headdress, he called me to his table. He said, "Bitch, you were like Cleopatra entering." He said, you want a job?" I said, "Yeah." So I was in and out of the Sweet Gum Head because doors were opening for me, people from other clubs and other towns seeing me. And it's like I said, everywhere I went, there's more money involved or a better club situation. It's like in my book, I can't even begin to name the clubs that I have worked. I can't name my favorite club because every club I ever worked in my life added to me. It made me a better person, better entertainer.
And you made some great connections because, Sweet Gumhead was owned by Frank Powell, and Frank Powell was the bar guru, the gay bar guru of Atlanta. I think he must have owned a dozen or more bars around the city, gay bars, from the tiniest little hole in the wall to, the big show bar like Sweet Gumhead, which, according to Martin Paget's book, it was named after Frank Powell's hometown, which is a tiny little town in Florida that was called Sweet Gumhead, Florida. And he decided to name his bar that because everybody always wonders, where the hell do you get a name like Sweet Gumhead? Well, there it is.
That's what we were told.
Frank Powell's hometown. And then you mentioned Bayou Landing. And I think at that time, Bayou Landing was owned by Frank Cavan out of Dallas.
Yeah, I think so.
And he owned a number of bars. He owned, there was a Bayou Landing in Atlanta at one time as well. And he owned numerous bars around the Southeast, but mostly in Texas. And his company still has bars in Texas. So you hooked up with some legendary bar owners there.
Oh, yes. I've worked with syndicate in places too.
The syndicate. Yeah.
Well, I have. And I mean,
Well,
they don't advertise it, but you learn, you see. But it wasn't a bad group, it wasn't a murdering bunch of people. But they had good bars and they had good representation. They treated us good. Bayou Landing, when I was there a couple months, and the Miss Gay America pageant was coming up, and it's going to be held in Atlanta, Georgia. And I talked them into letting me represent them and go to the pageant. So they sent me to the pageant. They drove me up, and when they did, I had everything with me. I stayed. I wanted to come back to Atlanta so bad. And so I got my way back to Atlanta, and I got back into the Gumhead after the pageant.
Now, when you worked at Gumhead, there were some, as I said, some legendary performers there. Some that are still around. John Greenwell is still around, who had performed as Rachel Wells.
Hot Chocolate. Larry Edwards.
Larry Edwards is still around. One performer who had a drag bar named after in later years was Levita Allen. She was there. Yep. What was it like for you to be around these other performers who had, some sort of a history and a background and a following, and you're walking in as a new person from Nashville, Tennessee? Did they treat you like part of the family, or did you feel like you were, less than?
The thing about the Gumhead was you had your disco queens that did all the disco numbers, and you had your ballad queens, and you had your blues queens, and you had your every one of them was perfect in their own field. And here I'm walking in, seeing all this. Like I told you, I was around some of the greatest entertainers you want to be around. And so I couldn't be if I couldn't do after one another. I just took a little from each and added it into my act, but not enough that you could say, "Oh, that was Levita Allen," or "That was so and so." But to have all those teachers during that period, entertainers helped each other. especially if you're getting started.
Did you have a mentor or a favorite, best buddy performer from Sweet Gumhead that you hung out with and learned a lot from?
Sweet Gumhead, I had Satan DeVille and Mark Jones. Mark Jones was the choreographer at one time at Gumhead, and they called me and Satan and Mark the Rat Pack because we was always together after hour bars and working benefits and doing everything.
Yeah, I interviewed Mark about, I don't know, a month or two ago, and he had some great things to say about you and the Sweet Gumhead, and both of you are still going strong in Atlanta. A lot of things. One thing that a lot of people don't realize, especially if they're younger, if they weren't out in the bar scene in the 70s or 80s or even the early 90s, is that the shows were so different then. You mentioned that Mark was the choreographer for Sweet Gumhead. Not only was he the choreographer, but he was also a male lead. But they back then, the shows were shows. These people went out of their way to make it as Broadway as possible, to have backdrops, to have props, to have matching costumes, to have choreographed, dance routines, to have three
And
or
more
four
than one
queens.
male. And more than one male.
And more than one male. And there were a number of them throughout Atlanta over the decades that performed in all the bars. Back then, it was a big deal. It wasn't one person getting on stage and twirling around, moving their lips for 3.5 minutes.
When I started in Nashville, that was the production. Then I moved to Sweet Gumhead. That was Las Vegas. The costuming for the productions. And I mean productions. We had hours of rehearsals. And we'd go, Mark, how do you expect us to do that step in high heels? Learn. You
rehearsed in high heels.
You rehearsed in high heels. And when you said rehearsals, you were there on time. And I mean, we did productions. My production, Mark Jones choreographed The Rose, A Night of Bette Midler. I was on stage for an hour and 15 minutes first show without walking off, and an hour the second show. I had a base costume, and the whole show was me doing Bette Midler in different productions. I do a solo, and then they come out into another. They come and dress me and go right into another production, right there in front of the audience. It was unbelievable. And it was like a Broadway show. And we had to do it again because it was such demand for it.
Yeah, and the thing too is, some of today's queens that go out there, they work, 2 gigs a month at some random bar somewhere. But the girls that worked at Sweet Gumhead, it was a full-time job. I mean, like you said, you had, 5, 6, 7 nights a week of shows. You had 4 or 5 days a week of, multiple hour rehearsals. You had all this stuff to do. It wasn't just, let me get out there and do the same song I've done for 8 years.
And then go home and work on your costumes and hair.
Yeah. It was a big deal. And I remember when I first moved to Atlanta, the first time I was in Atlanta, I thought, this is amazing. The community was so strong and so open. I mean, there obviously were neighborhoods that you didn't go walking down the street holding hands, but a lot of the parts of Midtown and Buckhead, you could be pretty open. You could go in there with a group of 5 or 6 effeminate men and have lunch and nobody threw anything at you. The bars were generally unbothered by a whole lot of violence and protests and things like that. We kind of had our own space, but the drag queens were just they were idolized in that city.
Fred was working he was doing construction, installing alarm systems, and he would eat at Silver Grill, and he'd come on, you got to eat at Silver Grill. I said, I'm not going down there while them construction workers and eat. I'm so obvious, no eyebrows, feminine and everything. Well, finally, he talked me into walking. I heard Charlie Brown, but it's about time. Amber Richards. There was at least 4 female impersonators in there out of drag eating. And construction workers just nobody paid attention. So that became a favorite watering hole for me.
I remember Silver Grill well, and Peggy.
Oh, Peggy.
Peggy, we love
Peggy.
Peggy.
We loved
Been out of our
Peggy.
house.
She came to our house
Several times.
and she set me up with her painters. They painted my house when I bought it.
Yeah, she was a character. And that's another example of how, the Midtown environment accepted the gay community, even back in the early 80s or late 70s,
Yeah.
to be able to go in there in a place that was not initially meant to be a gay establishment. I know when I lived in Atlanta, Silver Grill and several other places, Colonnade and a number of these restaurants, it was like
Mary Mac.
gay or gray. That was it.
Mary Mac.
Mary Mac's, yes. Mary Mac's Tea Room
Fred
down
and I
on
got married
Ponce.
Fred and I got married in Mary Mac's.
Oh, well, all right
We didn't
then.
know it. They didn't know it. we had a group for my 70th birthday, and it was about 30 of us. And Fred wanted to marry me on my birthday, and I said, okay, but let's not tell anybody. And so we had Satan DeVille. No, Bubba Delicious. He was ordained. He was sitting next to me, and so everybody was there. We had a room with a buffet for the birthday party, and I stood up and clicked the glass. I said, "Thank you for coming to my birthday. I'm 70 today, but we got a surprise for you." Fred stood up, and Bubba stood up. I said, "We're getting married right here, right now." And they were crying, and it was fabulous. But we got married in Mary Mac's.
Well, it's about time because y'all have been together for like ever.
Since 77.
That's a long time.
It's been a wonderful long time.
I know. I remember when you had your show at Backstreet and Fred was there working with lights and sound up there, and he was always close by and always seemed to be part of the inner circle. I know so many performers that their partners don't really get involved in their career or just kind of say, go do it. It's just like tell them to, go to the office or go work at the grocery store. They're not really involved. But Fred is, it seems like to me anyway, always been pretty involved in your career.
He's always been the backbone of my career and the financial backbone too. When we had hard times, when I was having hard times, he was working. When I entered pageants, that extra money came in for the pageants. When I did all my benefit works for Christmas for people with AIDS, I took off nights of work to do benefits in places. And he always was my backbone. And he was always the one to say, I'd say, I don't think I could do that. He said, yes, you can. Now get your ass out there and do it. And so to this day, he still pushes me.
So after you had gotten all this fabulous experience and you won Miss Gay Georgia, is that correct?
Yes. And the first Empress of Atlanta.
All right then.
And during that period, I was taking over the MC, and my MC is coming real strong and everything. And I could see a career of me MCing because nobody liked to MC. Nobody wanted on the microphone. And John Austin, the manager of the Sweet Gum, he had walked in the dressing room one night. He had just fired Diamond Leo. And walked in, handed me the microphone, and said, "You're the new MC." And I said, "I've never done it before." And he said, "You're funny. Get out there and do it." And that was the beginning of it. But I had done it enough that I was comfortable with it, and I started getting bitchy.
So that's where the bitch of the South was born.
Yep.
Is when John Austin handed you a microphone and said, "Go for it."
Yep. And I told Fred, I said, I'm not entering no more pageants. I'm going to take the title of the bitch of the South. And everybody's being announced. They said bitch of the South. And I could be about that. That opens me up to be bitchy on the microphone.
This is 1993. We're all fucking free. Stand up for who and what you and be proud of who and what you are. Don't put down what you don't understand. God put us all here on this earth. If he wanted us all straight, we'd all be straight. If he wanted us all gay, we'd all be gay. Who are we to judge his decisions? But I think
Then I learned I had a real act of picking on straight girls. And the thing about emceeing, you can almost say anything as long as you got a smile on your face.
Right. And I know from the shows that I've seen you perform over the years, you lucked out by connecting with someone who was so different than you, that was, not anywhere like what you were. The way she dressed, the way he performed, everything was different. But you and Lily White got together and you made such an incredible pair of MCs, picking on the crowd and going to opposite ends of the spectrum. You with your charming Southern drawl that everybody talks about, and Lily with that kind of grungy, gritty humor.
She growled.
That was an amazing. How did that come about? How did you and Lily end up working together?
Well, we were opposite MCs. And then Raven entered the picture. And she was totally opposite of me.
Well, it's way on down the road.
No, that's way on down the road. But Lily and I, we worked together fabulously. She was, like I said, she was totally opposite of me. And she just amazed me. Because I'd never been. The first time Fred ever saw Lily White, he said, "What the hell is that?" She was entering the bar with a red and black leopard print outfit, ripped up, holy everything, gigantic hair with a leash over her shoulder. And behind her was a boy dressed in the same outfit with a dog collar on. And Fred looked at it and said, "What the hell is that?" I said, "Fred, that's Lily White." He said, "Well, don't expect me to do any of that shit."
Well,
But that was Lily White. When she'd in her room, she made a statement. And I learned that from her. During the Limelight days, we'd go over there on Sunday afternoon. Dude.
the tea parties.
The tea parties. When you walked down them steps, everybody partied for you. You made an entrance. And that's how you built your name. You made those entrances in clubs.
Well, especially with Lily, with that. I mean, I remember Lily looked, I don't know, like a dominatrix. Like you were afraid not to step out of the way when Lily was coming down the stairs with those 6-inch stilettos and that shredded dress and the whip or the whatever she was holding in her hand. You didn't know what to expect.
Nope, you didn't. And she was a fabulous MC.
She was. And she was a really sweet person in person.
Oh, one of the nicest people you ever want to be around. And
But most people don't have that image in their head because they never get to know her off stage.
Yeah.
So you had this long career going from Nashville to Sweet Gumhead into multiple bars around the Southeast, other bars in Atlanta. You finally landed at Backstreet and had the unique distinction of having, first of all, a very large cabaret at the top of the most popular dance bar in all of the Southeast.
And 24 hours.
And it was open 24 hours. So you could be doing drag shows from 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning.
We did.
And the room would be crowded and the shows were always high energy. You had some amazing talent come through those doors, but eventually Backstreet closed and it had a long run. It was 30 years of Backstreet altogether. And suddenly that was gone. And the scene started to change in Atlanta. The nightclub scene around the time that Backstreet and the Armory disappeared, it kind of became a different scene. It's not the same now. The energy is totally different.
That's when we went to Underground Atlanta and had Charlie Brown's Cabaret in Underground Atlanta.
Which was that was your second solo venture? Didn't you have one in Buckhead also?
That was before I went to Backstreet.
Right.
They wanted me to put in like a dinner show up there.
That was at the old lesbian bar,
Tallulah.
Sports page
Tallulah's.
was killing them on business, and because they couldn't keep any loyal customers for some reason, and
so I was there for about 6 months, and Bev Cook, who was the manager of Backstreet at the time, she'd come in and have dinner and watch her show, and she come in one night and they told her, said, well, we've given Charlie notice. And she said, oh, you're kidding. She said, ordered her meal. She come back to the dressing room. She said, I was sitting back there crying. And she said, stop crying. You're going to open up on the top floor at Backstreet. And so we practically built that room stage ourselves, didn't we, Fred?
yeah.
I remember the way it was before. There was a waterfall in one corner, wasn't there?
Yeah,
rock water
and a big
grill
barbecue. They had a barbecue,
a brick barbecue grill, and
one of those freestanding 1960s fireplaces. Remember the teardrop shaped things?
Well, Henry wouldn't pay us, so we had to charge admission coming up the steps from outside, and they couldn't enter from the inside, and it got so busy. Henry said, we're gonna put y'all on payroll.
we want that coin from the door. So
so we got so busy. We got the fireplace out. We got they had, what was it in the middle there where they cooked?
Oh, the big grill.
The big grill. We got that out.
Yeah.
And I said, Henry,
I tore that out with a sledgehammer in the middle of the night one night, and got it all down just to the gas pipe coming up out of the floor, and wanted that out. And so I called the gas department and told them I smelled gas, and they were there in about 15 minutes. And I had Michael, the on-duty manager, to slip each guy, some money, and they took the pipe on out, and it was cool.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, I told Henry they standing over there on that flower box in front of the fountain, and somebody's going to break a leg.
Right.
And we can stand. I said we can stand 40 more people over there. He took it out in the next week.
Yeah, water features and drunk people are not really a good combination. Although, as you remember, Levita's / Lipsticks had a full Olympic-sized swimming pool that was right there in the middle of the floor that you could literally dive into while you were having a cocktail.
What we would close their show one night a week. Well, all of us run and jump in it and have a week tossing and all that. That was fun.
So after all these decades of performing at different bars, having your own cabaret at Backstreet and at a couple of other locations, Underground and in Buckhead, what keeps you out there now? You're still doing drag. You went to Lips after that. You had a show at Lips for a number of years.
6 years.
And you're still doing it. You have a regular show at the Eagle.
I'm going back to Lips. I'm going back to Lips on Saturdays for a Saturday brunch.
Wow.
Starting February the 18th from 2 to 4.
So what keeps you going? What is it that keeps you wanting to get out there on stage every day?
I enjoy entertaining, man. Well, now at the Eagle, it's unreal because most of the people that are coming to see me now were the young kids at the Eagle when Backstreet was going on.
Right.
So now they're grown, they're married, they own businesses, and they go out to dinner. They catch our show from 9 to 11, dance a little, they're home by midnight. And so a lot of the people I diapered at Backstreet are coming to see us now to Eagle.
Yeah,
And
I interviewed Richard Ramey a month or two ago as well,
well, he's one of
and
the nicest bar owners I think I've ever worked for. Now, I will tell you that
he
right
is a
now.
great guy,
I'll
and
tell you that right now.
I've seen online he gets a fair amount of grief from the old hardcore leather boys saying, "I can't believe that you brought drag into a leather bar." But let me tell you, I've been there. I was there opening night during Atlanta Pride, and first of all, that bar is big. You have 2 stories. You have the outdoor patio. You have plenty of space there. But from my experience, I don't think the leather crowd would support it from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 4 in the morning. I don't see that happening. But you do your shows early by
I do them
drag
at 9
standards.
o'clock. I do them at 9 o'clock, and we got a packed room.
Absolutely. It's good
That's
use of the
if the bar is
space.
making money. He's
It's
making
excellent, excellent use of the space. And for
money.
performers,
The show's over before 11.
for performers like you who are slightly over 29 years old, you don't want to stay out and do a show at 3 in the morning. But at 9 o'clock at night, you get a good crowd, you get to perform, and you still get to go home at a reasonable hour.
Yeah, I get to catch Saturday Night Live.
Did you ever imagine when you first became part of the Atlanta scene that you would be doing a regular drag show at the Eagles?
No. And I was so blown away when I got the call and went to his house and sat down and talked. And opening night, it's like I said opening night, I said, it's about time these two big forces met, the Eagle and Charlie Brown. And now we have Charlie Brown's X-rated Cougars. I don't have nothing against young girls, but the crowd that we have, they want the classic old drag. And this is giving a chance for the older queens in the city that has a hard time getting bookings, even though they're dynamite. It gives us a chance to work and see a lot of our fan bases that we never haven't seen in years.
Yeah, and I'm sure you don't want to put up with the BS that a lot of the bars want to throw at you. Well, we'll pay you $25 a night if you come in. If you don't bring a crowd, then we're canning you and whatever. You don't want to deal with that kind of stuff.
Well, it's not really out there anymore.
Well,
I mean,
it
if
is,
they're
but
bringing you in, they know you're going to bring your crowd. And the problem is it's extremely hard for a young entertainer to get started these days. When we was learning like I was learning from Rachel Wells, Hot Chocolate, Levita Allen, Satan DeVille, Bertha Butts, Latasha Wallace, top names. That's who I was learning from. But today's entertainers, the pioneers are gone. And a lot of the entertainers today are getting their drag off the internet.
Absolutely.
They're getting their look, their hair, their costume, the idea for the number. But the thing that they're not learning is the personality behind it, and how to sell it, how to just reach out and just pull the audience into you. They're like a remote control. They need to be more personal, and that's where I learned from the old girls that the young girls are not getting the opportunity.
Yeah, you came up in a time when drag was just completely different than it is today, when it was a team sport, when it was a big production. It was legit. I see a lot of performers now that come out that just do a 5-minute version of a TikTok twerking video, and they think that's entertainment, and that they don't have no
Personality.
to it. No, it's just, oh, look, I can twitch my butt for 5 minutes and flap my lips a little bit, and I should get some money for that. But y'all put it out there and did a great job.
I'm not putting down these young girls. They're wanting to learn it. They can learn it where they can. You know, and RuPaul has opened the door for these entertainers. One entertainer I worked with at Lips, La Ree. She's from a small town. Dance. Oh my God, she could dance. Well, she got on RuPaul's show. She's traveling the world now. She said, I'm going to Asia. I'm going to, China. I'm going everywhere. And that was the dream she had. And now the door's been opened for her for that.
Your history in Atlanta predates RuPaul. You were in Atlanta in the mid to late 70s, and RuPaul, I don't think, showed up until the early 80s. When you first heard about RuPaul in Atlanta, performing at weekends as a kind of male go-go boy on a little plywood box, did you ever imagine that person was going to go from oblivion to being probably the most widely recognized drag performer on the planet?
No, I wouldn't think that far. I didn't think that far. But everywhere Fred and I went, there was a little paper on the mailbox, on a telephone pole. Anywhere you look, there was a RuPaul at this club tonight, at this club tomorrow night. Fred said, that bitch knows how to promote herself, don't she?
Uh-huh.
She knew how to promote herself. She did it.
You
She
did.
sat back here in Atlanta, Georgia, and watched some of the best and finest. Went to New York, put her version of all of it together in designing RuPaul. She did it.
I remember
And she
those
was
days
at the
well.
right place. She was at the right place at the right time when she was discovered.
And she's a very sweet person. And
Very
that's,
sweet.
And that's what helped her
She's a very sweet person.
in the business.
Yeah. I remember Ru from his Atlanta days, and the one thing he had no shortage of was self-confidence.
Right.
I mean, I remember those posters that you're talking about, and it looked like he wrote them with a Sharpie and then photocopied them onto some colored paper and stapled them on telephone poles.
Yeah.
But he would, even though he held no titles and had no real fame, he would put things on those posters that said, tonight at 2 a.m., the world famous RuPaul at weekends on Peachtree Street. And there was nothing world famous about him except in his head, but it drew the attention of everybody. And, the rest is history.
That's right.
Yeah, he really did it. I mean, he's opened the door for these entertainers. The period I grew up in, we were taught to look like a lady. You wanted to look like a woman, and then pull that shit off.
Southern glam drag.
Southern glam drag. The more you looked like a woman on stage, the more you made, the more better tips you made. But then they wanted to see you out of makeup too.
And you were one of the first drag queens I remember ripping off their wig at the end of the show and throwing it on the stage. And what was the line? If you can't laugh at a,
you cannot laugh at a I can't.
However old.
If you cannot laugh at a 63-year-old fat bald-headed man in a dress, you don't have no business in Atlanta, Georgia. After dark.
Yeah.
And now it's I may look like Meemaw, but I do you like Pawpaw.
Those Southern roots coming out. So you've been working on a book, on a memoir. You mentioned it early in the segment. What is the name of your book?
Tales of the Bitch.
And
Charlie Brown and Mr. Rich Eldredge.
And Richard Eldredge is a great journalist from Atlanta. He's done a lot of really good stories about Backstreet and other gay topics, as well as everything else he writes about. But how far are you going back? Are you going back to the beginning and talking about everything from Nashville all the
From
way
my
through?
childhood, from my childhood.
Oh, wow.
I had a very interesting childhood growing up and going into Air Force. And I grew up in, I was born in Westmoreland, Tennessee. That's 70 miles north of Nashville. And I went to school in Macon County, Lafayette High School, which is spelled L-A-F, not a capital F. So it's pronounced Lafayette. And I've been corrected with that all my life.
Well, the street in downtown Nashville is also called Lafayette.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody wants to say Lafayette, and it's
Yeah.
not.
And it was Lafayette, Georgia. And I've noticed they've changed it to Lafayette now. But I had a wonderful childhood. I had a great mother and daddy. Goss. My father was a missionary Baptist, and he traveled all over northern Tennessee and southern Kentucky, founding missionary churches. And my mother would travel with him in a buggy. And when he quit, she took over. She was very religious. And so I had a very religious childhood. But I knew I was different the day I could feel anything and remember anything. Is this ain't for me. Looking around the farm, this ain't for me. And the older I got, I kept saying, the day I graduate, I'm gone. And I did.
And you're not going back.
Nope.
So when should we expect this book to come out?
Well, right at the beginning of the pandemic, it's when Rich did a Zoom on the Backstreet for reunion for Atlanta magazine. And Fred asked Rich, said, why don't you do Charlie's book? And he said, well, let me think about it. Next morning he called us. He said, all right, next Monday at 11 o'clock, I'm going to call you. And we're going to start at your childhood. And from that point on, he called every Monday through the pandemic. And he's got hundreds of hours of tales and stories. And it's just, I've had a very fun life. I've had a fabulous life. From meeting my husband in a girl's bathroom, his wife introduced us, and her sitting there sucking on a joint talking, me and him in eye lock from hell. And we've been together ever since. Just like I said, everything in my life, it's like God has opened the door for me.
And you still got many more years to go here.
I hope and pray I do, because I want Charlie Brown's Cougars to be a new thing. Fred will be joining us soon at the show. We'll be pulling some of our special effects and things. So
he's not doing drag.
No, he will be doing the sound. Fred will be doing the sound for a show.
Caddy.
Fred produced Backstreet. He directed us, and he's fixing to take over this one.
Good for
and
him.
I've got a great cast. I really do. All versatile, and I'm bringing in new versatile entertainers.
Very good. It's just what we need to keep some of that old school drag hanging around there, because, like you said, it's changed. It's a different scene now.
And when you hear Charlie Brown's Cougars, what does that say? It's a bunch of old girls. Bunch of old queens.
But they're still getting out there in 4 and 5 inch heels and dancing around the floor and twirling and looking pretty.
Oh, yeah. And bringing back memories to a lot of these guys.
Back to the book, briefly, the Atlanta magazine in October, their Pride issue, had an article which did excerpts from the first chapter of Charlie's book.
Rich says that the first chapter and last chapter is almost done. He said, we've built the house. He is taking, what do they call it when you take off for a month for something?
Sabbatical.
He's taking January sabbatical. We're going to try to finish the book.
Good.
He said the house is built. We're going in and decorate the rooms now.
Yeah, and we need more of that because, the last several years I've been working on trying to record all this history about the gay bars, which were kind of brushed under the carpet. Everybody talked about the activists and the politicians and the raids and all this stuff, and everybody forgot about the bars, which is what built our community. And so that's why I wanted to do this project and talk to so many people about the bars they remember and preserve those memories for the future. And I'm glad.
It's something you said we had to fight our way in, to drag, had to fight our way in.
Mm-hmm.
In Nashville right now, they're trying to outlaw drag in the state of Tennessee. In Florida and Texas, they're trying to make it a federal offense to cross-dress and perform.
Yeah.
And it will be here. Our governor.
Hopefully that won't happen, but I know
But
I live in
that's in our
Florida
gay
now, and
community.
I know it's
The
real.
drag queens opened up. The drag queens, one that started to protest and everything. Now we're gonna need our gay community to get behind us again.
We are, and hopefully we'll get them together. They'll see, these stories developing. They'll communicate online and meet up together and make some things happen. So we can just keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best.
I want to thank you. I've enjoyed this. I hope you opened your eyes to a few things.
Oh, you have indeed, and I'm particularly glad that we got to talk about Watch Your Hat and Coat and Sweet Gumhead, because those are two bars that have not been covered extensively in the interviews that I've done. And I'm glad to see that you're still going, and I'm looking forward to that book coming out whenever you and Richard get around to it. It's called Tales from the Bitch.
Tales of the Bitch.
Of the Bitch. Tales of the Bitch.
Bitch.
We will keep our eye out for that, and as soon as you have it coming out, make sure somebody lets me know, and I'll post it to our Facebook group and everywhere else so people know.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charlie. And thank you to the ghost of Mr. Fred Wise, who's hiding in the background, for filling us in with some of those details. Thank you, Fred.
Thanks, Fred.
Thank you for being on here and thinking about us. We're real happy to be here and doing this.
I'll see you next time I'm in Atlanta.
Thank you. Let me know when you're coming. You got a front row table.
All right.
That concludes another episode of the Gay Barchives Show. For more information about this episode or to find more episodes, visit gaybarchives.com.